So with Klee's second rerun coming up, I did a quick search on YouTube and there seems to be a huge gap in the market for proper, accurate and detailed Klee info. There aren't many guides on her. Now obviously the reason why I haven't filled this gap before is because the ultimate source for my knowledge is in the Keqing Main's Klee guide, as well as an offshoot called the Endgame guide on the Klee's Solitary Confinement Discord. Now I will preface this that I still ultimately recommend you read those. I physically cannot cover all the in-depth and nuance for Klee in a YouTube video, so I'm not going to try. This is going to be more of a condensed guide. I'll put the links for the full guides here and they will also be in the description. However, I did figure rather than waiting for other YouTubers to do it first, why not do a condensed version of the guide myself? Now I don't want to make this too long, but a lot of trial and error, theory crafting and testing has been done with Klee. I actually made a previous video on a similar topic, but essentially, the Klee community has solved a lot of issues that newer players may have with her, and we figured out a lot of tips and strats on how to play Klee to her strengths, how to avoid issues, and pretty much play her how she may have been intended to be played. Hopefully I can share some of that stuff with you guys in this video. So about her playstyle. Firstly, Klee is a glass cannon character. Being both a catalyst user and a child model, this does make her have the worst combination in terms of poise and natural defense. If you play her bad, you can also run out of stamina, leaving her very vulnerable. So yes, it's true that she is squishy. However, here's the upside. Does this mean you should protect her and play scared? No. Like I said, she is a glass cannon, meaning the best offense is a great defense. Her charge attacks can juggle, stunlock, and essentially trivialize most enemies in the game, meaning if you play your cards right, they can barely even get to attack you. I think this is the most important thing and fundamental difference between what separates an old Klee player from a new one. I don't even think it's learning all the animation cancels. Don't play scared, take fights head on, and I think you'll notice an instant improvement in how comfortable Klee plays. Try it out. Attack enemies before they can attack you. I think eventually everyone can learn how to play without a shield. Secondly, Klee is an incredible battery. Hopefully you know what that means, but if you don't, basically she's very good at generating team burst energy. She has 2 charges of her Jumpy Dumpties, meaning her skill creates a lot of Pyro energy, and not only that, but her A4 talent generates even more team energy. No, she isn't exactly Raiden level, but this is still great. Actually, I think you could think of her like Raiden for Pyro characters. Now currently this is actually a con, as Xiangling is the only off-field Pyro damage dealer currently in the game. Klee really has gotten screwed here. Nonetheless, we all know what a great character Xiangling is, so this is still a very nice asset for Klee. Even if you don't want to play mono Pyro teams, Xiangling is still an important teammate for her. Anyway, all us Klee mains are praying for more Pyro supports in the future. Okay, so YouTube guides usually start with talents, right? But I think you guys can just read them, so instead of being boring, I'll just go over things that Hoyoverse don't tell you. Her basic attacks are similar to Claymore hits, so you can mine things in the overworld. Klee's third normal attack can push back Heralds and Lectors, which is nice. However, aside from this, her full combo is pretty slow, so most players just mix 1 normal attack or 2 normal attacks with a charge attack. This is called N1C or N2C in the community, but I'll cover animation cancels later. Her normal attack actually has pretty small AoE, but her charge attack's AoE is huge, much bigger than the animation will make you think. Also, her charge attack is very good at staggering enemies. This is a key game mechanic and strat to take advantage of when playing her. Last note on her charge attack, contrary to popular belief, Klee is not actually a charge attack focused character. This is actually something that took a while for the community to figure out, but essentially, scientists have calculated that across the rotation, Klee's natural damage output is pretty evenly spread across all of her talents, and her elemental skill, Jumpy Dumpty, is more significant than people think, more significant than even Hoyoverse thinks also. Anyway, I'll touch on this more in the talent upgrade priority section. As for Klee's skill, Jumpy Dumpty can be fairly complex and nuanced, As mentioned, a lot of players actually underestimate its damage. You get 3 bounces and 8 mines, which can add up to a lot, and both Jumpy Dumpty and the mine snapshot buffs, which is cool. So you can use it at the start of fights. It can generate energy for the team and help charge up their bursts. However, it's going to be unbuffed, so the damage isn't going to be maximized. What most players prefer doing is instead using your charges once a team buff has been set up. When you use 2 charges back to back, the second set will detonate the first set early, and it gives Klee nice burst window damage. The mines of the second charge will then be left on the field. One of the keys to maximizing Jumpy Dumpty's power is making sure all the mines blow up. Unless you're fighting a huge enemy, like that time Klee fought the Primo Geovishap, you generally have to suck in her mines with animo characters. Unfortunately, Venti cannot do this for Klee. He's still a synergistic character and useful teammate in other ways, but this is one of his weaknesses. Kazuha and Sucrose have special synergy for this. Both of them will not only suck in Klee's mines, but they can actually suck in Jumpy Dumpty altogether. So it's really nice to cast Kazuha's skill or Sucrose's burst before you swap to Klee, so you can have optimum control and positioning over Jumpy Dumpty and the mines. Onto her elemental burst. If you thought the previous attacks had good multipliers and dealt good damage, well actually their multipliers were balanced with her burst in mind. Essentially the burst fires lasers regularly. You can think of it like a stand, or even similar to Xingqiu or Yelan's burst attacks. Without getting too technical in this video, roughly every 1.7 seconds you will get 3 to 5 of these lasers, which is a random chance, and they will also randomly lock onto an enemy in the area. You want to use this as soon as possible, as it's just extra free damage and this will last as long as Klee wants to be on the field. However, a cool tech is that it can be used to animation cancel any talent. The common one, which almost all Klee players will do, is using the burst as soon as Klee throws Jumpy Dumpty. If you do it too early, she won't actually throw Jumpy Dumpty, so you will have to learn the timing, but it's not too hard. This saves you a bit of time. I might as well mention it, but the idea of doing it too early is actually used as a strat or an exploit, and players can use it to get an extra stack for something like Kagura's Verity or Crimson Witch. Her first ascension talent is actually bugged. You can actually only get a spark every 4 seconds. This means you'll probably only get it 2 to 3 times whilst on field with her. Also, if the animation cancels the normal attack which gives you the spark, it can still cost you stamina. On the plus side, the sparks do last 30 seconds even when Klee is not on the field. As for the damage increase, the 50% is actually additive with a lot of buffs in the game. With most teams, you can expect a 20 to 25-ish% total damage increase. Lastly, her A4 talent, it's good, as most people have Klee on the field for around 8 to 10 seconds until team buffs and her bursts run out. You're typically getting around 6 to 8 free energy for the team. It's not quite 20 or so energy like Raiden, but it's still useful. Just to clarify, but it doesn't stack in AoE. You only get 2 energy max per actual attack. The nice thing about this is that you get the energy even if Klee doesn't deal damage, like if you crit on a shield. So animation cancels, I've actually made a decision not to cover these too much in this video, but if you want to learn more about them in depth, as I mentioned, see the KQM guide. The reason why I'm not is I'm actually starting to think this is a misconception with Klee. You really don't need to learn all of these and be a gaming god to play her. If you ask any Klee main which ones they mainly use, it's this right here. This is all you mostly need to know. N1C and N1C with jumping. You honestly don't need to know machine gun to get by, seriously. However, something like N2C is important for juggling and keeping enemies stun locked, but you can learn that eventually. So here's an example. In a general rotation, after setting up the team, you can see I'm just doing N1C and dodging as needed, and this is something that you can speedrun with. So in conclusion, read up on the full guide if you want to learn more advanced strats, but animation cancels certainly aren't a priority. Just go out and have fun with her. However, the second part of controlling Klee I think is still important for all players, juggling and stun locking enemies, which I did briefly touch on in the intro of this video. Whether you're in the overworld or doing Abyss or even soloing in the Abyss, this is Klee's special magic trick and one of the key things that make her so fun to play. Essentially, attack enemies with charge attacks until their poise is broken and they start flying. You can alternate N1C and N2C to keep them stun locked, with juggling towards them if they fly away. As for Constellations, again, I'm not going to bore you by reading these all out. However, overall they're very interesting, because if you've been very observant, you'll notice that the designs of these constellations further back up my initial assessments that 1. Klee is not a selfish charge attack focused character, and 2, she was designed to be played with multiple damage dealers in the team. If you just want the TLDR, we recommend either C0 or C2 as a stopping point. So her C1 is okay, it's a 10% chance of free extra damage. Again, notice that it can proc on any attack. N1, N2, N3 charge attack and pressing E and Q. Its Pyro application is shared ICD with her burst, however its actual proc chance has no ICD, so the amount of it you can get and how it affects your gameplay is pretty random and luck based, but that's essentially a nod to Klee being a luck character in lore. This constellation used to get a bad rep in the past for ruining vape setups, but nowadays with a variety of teams it's not an issue. Besides, people generally get this as a stepping stone to C2. Her C2 is popular. As I just said, most players either have C0 or C2 Klee if they really like her. It makes her a more legit support option, but still great for her own teams. Against endgame enemies, you're generally getting around a 14% damage increase for the entire team, which is theoretically huge. However, it doesn't affect transformative reaction damage like Kazuha swirls, and the obvious thing is that unless you change your setups, your team will be doing some damage before Klee even uses her mines. Overall, if you are a player who does get early constellations on occasion, Klee C2 is pretty nice. I don't need to touch on her C3 or C5. Her C4 is actually pretty good, although as I said, C0 or C2 is the stopping point. Anyway, for C4 we see some endgame players hit over 100k with this even in mono Pyro teams. It's used quite well in speedruns. Essentially, at some point you switch off Klee, proc this big hit, and then immediately switch to Kazuha to suck in leftover Klee mines. In a short period you get pretty good burst damage. Lastly, her C6, again notice that it promotes Pyro teammates. For the energy part, you get 9 flat energy total for the team, so combined with her A4, Klee is giving the team about 15 energy or so, plus whatever is generated from her skill. That's pretty solid and it gets her closer to Raiden level. Actually, if you look at this, it's almost a prototype behind Raiden's base kit. Anyway, as nice as it all sounded, it's obviously not recommended, since the idea behind someone who gets C6 characters is that things are so broken you just play however you want, and Klee C6 isn't on the same level of brokenness as things like Eula's or Yelan's anyway. Talent priorities may be different than you initially thought, and slightly different than the in-game analysis too. This isn't necessarily wrong, but as explained many times now, Klee's damage is evenly spread. And in fact, even then, the damage distributions shown are assuming fully completed rotations. The faster enemies are defeated, the more relevant her skill is. Actually, some of the high investment players on the Klee server even say her skill is the most important. Therefore, talent priorities are recommended as follows. Obviously, note that these are just our recommendations. If you have more enjoyment going for big damage per screenshot, you can focus on her auto attack. Or if you only play her as a support, you can ignore it entirely. Klee's weapons, this is a very important section. Here's my weapon calcs, however I will add a huge disclaimer that we do not recommend pulling for any of the current 5-star catalysts. Use the Widsith or the highest damage option you have and save your primos. Only in very niche circumstances like Yayamiko and Kagura's Verity are the 5-star weapons worthwhile options. Obviously, I use Lost Prayer sometimes when I don't want to bother with the Widsith, but I got that as an off rate, I didn't specifically pull for it. I'm going to use this section to try explain why the current catalysts are horribly undertuned and not worth it. When proper catalysts come, they will blow these out of the water, so save up for them. So if we look at bows, take Skyward Harp. Now if you remember, for a long time this was actually heralded as straight up the best 5-star weapon in the game. It has high base attack, crit rate substat, and again a second crit substat on top in the passive. This is great. One of 5-star weapons' strengths are the fact that they have an extra substat on top of potentially a really nice passive. So Skyward Harp, despite how good it was as a universal stat stick, its physical passive here isn't actually that great, hence we later saw bows ended up even power creeping this. T-Pulse, technically tailored for Yoimiya, however it's still very good. As you can see here, its second substat is attack, which isn't necessarily as good as crit, but if you look at its passive, this is a ton of normal attack damage, and it's not hard to get stacks too on certain characters. At the time this ended up being an upgrade for Child 2, and even then a short while later Child ended up getting an even better weapon. Polar Star is also a great option on many bow characters too. See, it's still giving crit rate, and its extra substat is skill and burst damage very universal. Its passive is not easy for all characters to maintain all of these stacks. but this is still a ton of attack. And then lastly, we just got Aqua Simulacra, just a ton of crit damage, 88% at max, and an extra 20% universal damage. It's a bit conditional with the range, plus it isn't the best on a lot of bow characters, but it's still amazing. Now let's compare with the sorry state of Catalyst. Skyward Atlas, the brother to Skyward Harp. The elemental damage bonus is nice, but it gives attack instead of crit, and it has arguably even a worse passive than Skyward Harp. Klee already has tons of damage bonus and a lot of attack. This passive is physical, so it's bad. Memory of Dust, it gives attack as a substat and no relevant second substat, shield strength. Essentially, even with a shielder for its passive, it's only a sideway to Atlas, which isn't even that good itself. Lost Prayer has crit rate, but it doesn't even have an offensive second substat. The passive gives damage bonus, but it takes time to turn on. But Klee snapshots her skill and burst before you even get a stack. You end up getting some of this damage bonus with her auto attacks, but it's not significant. Essentially, Lost Prayer is just this base attack and this crit rate, no passive. Kagura's Verity, also it doesn't have a second pub stat. It's designed so Yaramiko can really exploit it and get a lot of damage bonus. However, other characters, for someone like Klee, you're only getting skill damage. And with a previously mentioned bug exploit at the start of Abyss Chambers, you can get 12% universal elemental damage. It's only 12% and she can't sustain that anyway. Moonglow, joke weapon even for Kokomi, not usable in other characters. TLDR, these weapons are not good. The reason why Widsith is the best on most Catalyst users isn't even because it's that overpowered. In short, weapons get power from base attack, substat and passive. Take the Widsith, because it's a 4-star it naturally has low base attack, so it loses there, but the crit substat is basically just as strong. And unlike the other 5-star Catalyst, it actually has a good passive. Now obviously its value gets diminished because of downtime, but if you think about it, getting one of these buffs makes up for way more damage than having slightly less base attack. Good, great, great is stronger than great, great, bad. Now without spending too much time on this, I'll quickly go through swords because it has a mix of both. Swords started off with pretty mid weapons. Aquila Favonia giving physical damage, attack and a healing passive, not great. Skyward Blade, it's got a little bit of crit rate, but ER, movement speed, attack speed, it wasn't that useful. Those are what we had at launch. Summit Shaper giving a lot of attack but nothing else. Then in 1.3 we ended up getting Jade Cutter, ton of crit rate and a lot of flat attack. Though it didn't really have a passive, sword characters got so much attack and crit from this that it blew out the previous options in most scenarios. Then Mist Splitter came, crit damage, elemental damage bonus, and then even more damage bonus with it not being too hard to maintain stacks on characters like Ayaka and Keqing. In fact, these two weapons are so universal and strong that even when Haran came out for Ayato, Jade Cutter is often just as strong. So in conclusion, I've done calcs, and if ever Catalysts get even one of these Jade Cutter, Mist Splitter or Polar Star variants, as you can see it will basically blow out the other options. And these weapons wouldn't even be tailored for Klee. Even if Skyward Harp, a power correct bow, was a catalyst, it would be stronger than pretty much all the other catalysts. So again, skip weapon banners, save for the next region, and whatever catalyst characters come with those patches will most certainly have a better weapon for Klee. Actually, there could also be a future millennial movement catalyst like Energy or Freedom Swan. Giving team buffs would be great for Klee too. Just save up. For artifacts, this doesn't need to be a long section. Most players are either using 2-piece Crimson Witch with a 2-piece attack set like Gladiators or Shimenawas, or they're using 4-piece Lava Walkers, which is technically best in slot for Mono Pyro and Reverse Melt, but actually only about 1 or 2 substat rolls better, which is like 2 to 5% better. Then you factor in that some enemies have elemental auras over their heads like slimes, where your damage will be lost, so it's up to you. For more niche teams like players using vape teams, 4-piece Crimson Witch can also be used, but again it isn't a big upgrade over the mix set, so it's not necessary to bother. However, keep an eye on this 40% burning damage. That might be good in the future whenever Dendro comes out. Just a warning, we get a lot of this on the Discord. 4 Shimenawas is not good for Klee. You're sacrificing burst damage. Not only that, but you're technically sacrificing skill damage too, since instead of this there could have been a 15% pyro damage or another 18% attack set, or lava walkers that buffs all damage. As for main stats on your artifacts, there is a chance that this could be more flexible in the future with new teams and new Dendro reactions. You never know, but for now it's always attack, pyro damage, crit for everything. Even in a reaction team, not all of Klee's attacks can trigger reactions anyway, so EM isn't that worth it, at least going for on a main stat. Again, this could change in the future. For ER recommendations, it's technically advised to check with a calculator or test in-game with your specific team and rotation, and I will go into specific teams in the team section, but in reality, if you want a TLDR, for most teams Klee does not need much ER, especially in mono pyro, and I'd say as long as you have 110 to 120, you'll probably be comfortable. Pyro damage cup is very important. I do see newer players on occasion use an attack cup because it has crit or because it completes a set, but that's rarely worth it. Farm for a pyro cup. So just before we dive into teams, I do want to do a quick overview on how you can typically play Klee once you switch into her. To state the obvious, this is just a guideline to keep in mind. It's not important for all players, and also some teams are more flexible whereas others can need proper setups, so depending on many factors you can easily deviate from this. For example, Klee's skill can be used early to generate energy for the team, or if you're not too concerned about speed, she can stay on longer to keep juggling enemies and stop them from attacking you. For teammate synergies, it's good to get into this first before discussing team building. For starters, Klee doesn't heal or shield herself, obviously, so we have to look into teammates with defensive utility. Now I've shortlisted a few characters here, but I'm going to quickly explain why almost everyone picks Bennett. Firstly, whether they just heal, just shield, or even do both, all these options can sufficiently do that job well and keep Klee healthy. The thing is, when it comes to synergy, you have to look at what else they can bring to the table. Bennett provides fast healing, a huge attack buff with his burst, pyro res for more attack, noblesse oblige for even more attack, pyro energy to reduce Klee's ER requirements, and lastly, Klee's skill and burst can snapshot his buff. Now let's see what Zhongli can provide. A very strong shield, 20 resistance shred to enemies in close range, and a damage increase for Klee either with 4-piece Petra or 4-piece Tenacity. See, the shield here is actually pretty nice, but as you can see the damage increase isn't comparable to Bennett's, so ultimately Zhongli trades healing for shielding, which has its own pros and cons. Now for Jean, she can provide fantastic healing, red shred with 4 VV. You can see although 4-piece VV is great by itself, it's not stronger than the previous two, and unfortunately Jean doesn't have much more buffs built into her kit. She can group Klee's mines, which would be very important. However, as covered earlier in the guide, Kazuha and Sucrose perform this role much more naturally, especially as Jean cannot provide off-field grouping, and they also buff the team damage a lot more than Jean. So unfortunately, whilst Jean's ability to group is nice, it's better to get this job done properly rather than just barely. But of course, if you want to play Klee and Jean together, you certainly can. Lastly, Diana can bring both healing and shielding, although she isn't the best at either, especially her healing can tick slowly. She can also bring a 20% attack buff with noblesse, and does technically have a C6 which can buff Klee's EM, however currently there's not much way to benefit from that. So between the 4 defensive teammates, Bennett is the clear choice in terms of maximum damage and synergy for Klee. Another factor that will also play a part later is how Bennett has great synergy with other prospective teammates. Xiangling is another very synergistic character. With high off-field damage, everyone plays her in a wide variety of teams. However, as you may or may not know, the common theme with her teams is that they have to accommodate your high energy demands, either spending significant portions of time having to battery her, or having higher than average rotation lengths. This is why most of her teams end up revolving around her. She's not a plug and play damage dealer, but Klee is a beast in energy generation, especially high pyro particle generation with her 2 charges of Jumpy Dumpty and her energy talent. This allows a synergistic core of Klee, Bennett, Xiangling to be one of the few Xiangling cores, similar to Raiden, Bennett, Xiangling, where her costly burst is not burdensome and easily used off cooldown. Now aside from these two launch characters, there unfortunately hasn't been other off-field Pyro damage dealers or supports released, so there's not much to take advantage of Klee's energy generation. This is an area we have to wait for new characters on. The other kind of teammates Klee has great synergy with is animo characters. The grouping that they bring is not just important for Klee's Jumpy Dumpty, but also makes better use of her AoE damage. For example, Klee's burst usually has small AoE, however as you can see, once the lectors are tightly grouped they're both getting wrecked by it. Secondly, the VV set is a big deal, as well as elemental damage bonus from both Kazuha or Sucrose. These things multiply all of Klee's damage, as well as these buffs not being bound to ICD like a vape or melt reaction, so the efficiency and overall gain is very substantial. Ignoring Bennett C6, also notice how all these multipliers are unique multipliers and don't compete with Bennett and Pyro's attack buffs. Stacking several multipliers like this is very efficient. The standout is Kazuha. Almost the entirety of his kit is useful for Klee. Aside from VV and his buffs, I've already shown you how casting his skill before Klee's damage window allows control over enemy AoE and Jumpy Dumpty. His skill also has short cooldowns, so you can easily repeat the same thing right after you're done with Klee. The stamina saving from his passive talent will also be useful. Leniency with her ability to dash, to dodge attacks or animation cancel is very noticeable. Lastly, as mentioned, Kazuha's ability to synergize with other prospective teammates is important. His suction not lifting enemies in the air gives him better synergy with common Klee teammates like Xiangling or Rosaria. In terms of teammates with questionable synergy, there are off-field damage dealers of various elements you can play around with and certainly build teams with. However, a lot of them have various pros and cons. One of the most recurring ones being that their off-field damage is triggered from normal attacks, so ultimately they're not as synergistic with Klee as one would like. However, Fischl still has nice potential with Klee, as Oz can still attack without too much reliance on normal attacks with her C6. So finally, teams, probably the most important section, and to clarify, you're free to build and figure out your own teams, especially to suit your own playstyle and roster. Mono Pyro, or Triple Fire as some call it, is the strongest, most simplest, arguably easiest to play and most flexible Klee team. Of course, unless you need elemental variety for shield breaking, otherwise this is the recommended team for all players. It's also the most popular one. The first thing that the guide has to clarify is that Mono Pyro is not a Constellation team played just because Klee cannot take advantage of reactions. This is incorrect. This team is played due to the great synergy between all four characters. Actually, these are arguably the three most synergistic characters even individually for Klee. Together this just happens to not have reactions. Mono or triple elemental teams aren't run as gimmicks. Like Ito Geo teams, that's not a gimmick. It's used because Goro buffs Ito and Albedo's damage, and then you can even go all the way since Zhongli provides further buffs and shield consistency for Geo-Res. It's not a gimmick, it's character synergy. Same thing with Mono Cryo and pairing teammates that synergize with Shenhe and Ayaka when freeze isn't effective. A team having or not having reactions like Melt or Vaporize has no predisposition to whether it makes a good team. Hopefully I've managed to cover why reactions are not the be-all end-all for team building. So onto the team, I do highly recommend reading the KQM guide for this. There's heaps of stuff on this team there. As for why the team works well, here's a breakdown of the team's circular synergy, meaning how all the teammates benefit from each other. There's also a lot of gameplay and rotation videos you can watch. I have a whole video on rotation variations and tips, but here's some excerpts for how you can play it. Swirl Pyro with Kazuha for buffs and debuffs. You need to do this so Xiangling can snapshot all of these team buffs. It's then important to use Kazuha's skill before Klee. As mentioned, not only does this refresh the VV debuff and group enemies, but you also want the suction for pulling in Klee's Jumpy Dumpty. Using Kazuha's skill again after Klee will also refresh buffs as well as cleaning up any leftover mines. Here's also a faster setup if you don't need the energy or initial grouping. The team is very flexible and feels smooth in both single target and AoE content. Since all buffs and debuffs in the team are pretty much constant, you don't really lose much by making up your own rotation to suit a specific fight. Shown here, You can easily delay Xiangling's burst as needed, use Kazuha's skill liberally for on-demand grouping, or even just stay on Klee for as long as you need if you need to juggle enemies. So this takes the team to the next level, making it not just a good Klee team but also a great team overall. Since obviously not everyone has Kazuha, the most popular alternative is Sucrose. Kazuha is unfortunately just better in every way than Sucrose here. Bigger damage buffs which last longer and are easier to reapply. His stamina reduction is helpful. His grouping is also with his skill, unlike Sucrose's who is mostly tied to her burst. She does have okay grouping with her own skill, but you will often find it on cooldown. Importantly, his burst has a 60 energy cost compared to hers having 80. And overall he just does more damage than her as well, especially factoring in you have to build high ER on her and potentially using a weaker weapon like Fav Codex or TTDS. Even if you don't have Kazuha, it's still recommended to play either Sucrose here, or if you really want a shield, you can play Juggling with Archaic Petra. And many players over at the Discord still prefer monopyro teams over others even with Sucrose. Xiangling is built similarly to her usual builds, except you don't bother with EM substats. I recommend 180 ER at least, although if you're an endgame player and know what you're doing, you can go lower. If you're newer to the team and closer to 200 can be more comfortable, Emblem is still best on her, although Lava Walker can be an option. As for weapons, it's a similar story to most of her teams, they're all fairly similar. Bennett, again straightforward, you can build him for a typical 4 noblesse, high base attack weapon, high ER. However, because there's so much Pyro in this team, he actually doesn't need that much ER at all, like you can work at 160 even. Therefore, if you know what you're doing, you can invest quite a bit into his damage, but this isn't necessary. Kazuha similar, very standard build, nothing crazy, 4VV, EM. If you're using Fav or Sack Sword, then you won't need much extra ER. If you're using Freedom Sword or Iron Sting, then you probably want an ER Sans. For the alternatives, if you're using Sucrose, ideally you have her at C6. Her burst is really important to emulate Kazuha. She will want a lot of ER. Her damage is okay but not that important here. You want 200 ER as a goal and you can use any of these 3 weapons. Fav Codex for more team energy and easy burst. Sack Frags also gives easy burst and an extra skill, meaning more energy and more grouping. Or if you know what you're doing, you can go TTDS to increase Xiangling's damage, although in energy scarce situations this can be tough on Sucrose and she may not be able to burst every rotation. So this can be worth it depending on the fight. Zhongli, 4 Petra or Tenacity, give him HP artifacts or damage, whatever you prefer. However, I'm assuming most people don't actually have a Petra set, so 4 Tenacity may be most common. Attack isn't as good as the damage bonus from Petra, but it's workable. So from this overall, you can basically consider these the 2 current cores of Klee teams, either Klee, Bennett, Kazuha and whichever 4th character you're interested in. You can have Pyro, Cryo, Electro or even just a shield. Or the other core, Triple Fire, Klee, Bennett, Xiangling, and then whichever 4th for utility. Reverse Belt, this is one of the other recommended teams from that Kazuha core. In the 4th slot you add Rosaria instead of Xiangling to melt her damage. You also really want Rosaria C2 here for the duration increase. This is a strong team, however it's lost a lot of popularity over the past year simply because setting up the team buffs and debuffs for Rosaria is just a lot more annoying, essentially only realistic in AoE fights, and ultimately the damage isn't even an overall improvement over Mono Pyro. Here's how you would set up the team. Apply Cryo with Rosaria, apply Pyro with Klee or Bennett and swell both with Kazuha. Since the team is losing Xiangling's Pyro energy, it does add up and Klee and Bennett won't be as comfortable with energy here. Actually, if you want a rough estimate, Klee may be most comfortable going up 10%, so aim for 120 to 130 ER to be most comfortable. For Rosaria's build, she wants to be dealing a lot of damage, however I do recommend aiming closer to 160 ER, even better if you have C4. She can effectively run Lava Walker in this team and something like Deathmatch or Dragon's Bane, which you prefer over burst gearing like the Catch or ESF, since her skill will be reverse melting in this team for good damage too. Now in the full guide for Vape and Overload teams, there aren't actually Kazuha teams recommended, not because these teams are actually better, but 1, I can't assume everyone has Kazuha because most people don't, and 2, if you do have Kazuha, the idea is just to use one of these Mono Pyro or Reverse Melt teams. As for Vaporise teams, this is a strong team, especially if you lack access to Kazuha. There's been a lot of gameplay comparisons done by the Discord players, and it can be competitive with the Kazuha monopyro team versus bosses, although it doesn't clear faster and certainly not in AoE. Importantly, it doesn't actually play to Klee's strengths. It doesn't matter how much pyro application double hydro applies. I did a video mostly focusing on this analysis, and it's also a section in the KQM guide and Discord FAQ. So I recommend checking out one of those for a detailed speech. However, for a TLDR, just because Klee has a lot of pyro application doesn't mean she doesn't have ICD issues. She has standard ICD on most of her attacks, meaning that even with insane hydro application from Yelan and Xingqiu, you're probably only vaping 1/3 of Klee's attacks. Combine that with the fact that her talents provide damage evenly, this means you're only really buffing 1/3 of her damage too, and whatever you aren't vaping is mostly going unbuffed. That's one of the reasons why Kazuha and Juggling have great synergy with Klee. Their debuffs and buffs increase damage from all of Klee's attacks, and especially buffing her jumpy dumpties, which is what enables front-loaded damage and flexible gameplay. Especially in monopyro teams, the buffs that Klee gets also go to Juggling, so there's a lot of good synergy there. Whereas if you compare in this team, the team isn't really sharing all of the buffs. That's not to say that this is a weak team. As I said, you're still probably clearing abyss chambers faster than most teams. However, even then that could be inconsistent due to losing animal grouping too, potentially both AoE consolidation and mind damage. Here's some footage of me speedrunning with it recently. For gear, and this goes with double hydro teams in general, if you're good with energy and know what you're doing, ideally you want one of your hydros on a fab or sack weapon and the other on a more offensive one, since they reduce each other's energy requirements. I imagine for most people this would mean Yelan on fab bow, since it's free, and Xingqiu on whatever 5-star sword you may have. Still, some might want to do the opposite and give Yelan a buffing weapon like Elegy of the End, meaning you may want Xingqiu on something else to make up for the energy, like sack sword. Overload teams are actually pretty fun and underrated. The utility is great. Combining Klee's charge attacks with overload can make clearing content easier due to enemies barely being able to attack you. Here's a cool example. Now, ignoring the fact that these wolves are a bit weak to electro teams, one of the speedrunners in the Klee Discord actually got fairly similar abyss clear times with his overload team to his monopyro team. The obvious issue with this team is that you're lacking a Kazuha or Sucrose grouping, so you could replace Beidou with Kazuha. The ER recommendations have to be taken with a grain of salt, since Beidou's elemental skill requires adapting on the fly. This means, especially in this team, rotation should only be used as a rough guideline, and I encourage to switch off characters to parry with Beidou opportunistically. Still, here's a rough rotation. Lastly, I just want to briefly touch on Dendro teams. This burning reaction already exists in game, but I'm still being cautious. I can't assume the current mechanics of it will be the same when Dendro actually gets released. Still, whatever it is will probably be exciting and fun for Klee. Potentially brand new comps and builds can be made, so look forward to that.
Maybe there's even more buried below!
Similar thing with the idea of overvape teams causing both overload and vaporize reactions. Whilst there isn't currently a standout team, who knows, these compositions might get even better adding Dendro reactions into the mix. There's a lot to look forward to. Thanks for watching this far. If you did learn a lot and want me to make more guides in the future, let me know, but this did take a very long time to plan, plus I would only ever do guides on things I'm confident about and think I might have a lot of knowledge to bring to the table. Please feel free to join the Discord community. It's hard to get good quality Klee info outside of the community, and you don't want to miss out. Lastly, check the full guides in the description, as well as tons of Klee videos on my channel.